In 2018, a team of researchers made a discovery in the Sahara Desert that completely changed everything we thought we knew about ancient civilizations. But here's the weird part. The findings were buried in academic journals that almost nobody reads, and the lead scientists refused to talk about it publicly for over 2 years. What did they find that made them so uncomfortable? And why did they try so hard to keep it quiet? Look, I know that sounds like some conspiracy theory nonsense, but stick with me here because this story gets absolutely wild, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand why certain discoveries make scientists really nervous about sharing their work with the world. So let me take you back to where this all started. There's this massive structure called the Richat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. It's this giant circular formation in Mauritania that's so big you can literally see it from space. For years, scientists thought it was just a natural geological formation. Basically, erosion doing its thing over millions of years. Nothing special, right? Wrong. In 2018, a joint research team from the University of Tunis and a French geological institute decided to do a comprehensive ground survey of the area. They weren't even looking for anything mysterious. They were just mapping the geological features for a completely boring academic study. But when they started digging and using ground-penetrating radar, they found something that shouldn't exist. There were structures beneath the surface, not natural structures, man-made structures, or at least structures that looked like they were made by intelligent beings. And these structures were buried under layers of sediment that dated back thousands of years before any known civilization should have had the technology to build something like this. Now, before we go any further, let me explain why this is such a massive problem for mainstream archaeology and history. See, we have this pretty solid timeline of human civilization. We know when the Egyptians built the pyramids. We know when the Sumerians developed writing. We know when humans figured out agriculture and started forming permanent settlements. The whole story of human development is basically mapped out, and it follows a clear progression from simple to complex. But these structures under the Eye of the Sahara? They didn't fit that timeline at all. The dating suggested they were built during a time when humans were supposedly still living in small nomadic groups, hunting and gathering. We're talking about a period when people weren't even supposed to have the organizational capacity to build large permanent structures, let alone something as sophisticated as what they were finding. The lead researcher, Dr. Amina Banali, later described it as finding a smartphone in a cave painting. It just didn't make sense with everything we thought we knew. So what exactly did they find? Well, this is where things get really interesting and also really controversial. The ground-penetrating radar showed what appeared to be a series of concentric circles, like rings within rings, that matched almost perfectly with the natural circular formation of the Richat structure itself. But these weren't natural. The spacing was too precise. The measurements were too exact. And when they dug down in specific locations, they found carved stones with markings that nobody could identify. These weren't crude scratches either. These were sophisticated symbols arranged in patterns that suggested some kind of written language or symbolic system. But here's the thing, this predated any known writing system by potentially thousands of years. The team collected samples, took thousands of photographs, and documented everything according to proper scientific protocols. And then something strange happened. The funding for the project was suddenly cut. The university told them they needed to wrap up the research and submit their findings. Just like that, the project was over. Dr. Banali tried to publish the findings in major archaeological journals, but she kept getting rejected. The peer reviewers said the claims were too extraordinary and needed more evidence. But when she applied for funding to go back and get more evidence, she was denied. It was like running into a brick wall from every direction. Now, I want to be clear about something here. I'm not saying there was some grand conspiracy to suppress this information. What I am saying is that the academic world has a really hard time accepting discoveries that challenge fundamental assumptions about human history. Scientists have built entire careers on the current understanding of how civilization developed. If that understanding is wrong, it doesn't just mean rewriting a few textbooks. It means questioning decades of research and potentially invalidating a lot of established academic work. And that makes people defensive. Really defensive. But Dr. Banali wasn't the type to just give up. She started reaching out to independent researchers and journalists. She shared her data with other scientists who were willing to look at it with fresh eyes. And slowly, more information started coming out about what they had actually found. One of the most interesting aspects of the discovery was the presence of what appeared to be advanced water management systems. Remember, this is in the middle of the Sahara Desert. But thousands of years ago, this region wasn't a desert. It was actually a lush green landscape with rivers and lakes. Climate change, the natural kind that happens over geological time, turned it into the desert we see today. The structures they found suggested that whoever built them had sophisticated knowledge of hydraulics and water engineering. There were channels carved into stone that would have directed water flow. There were what appeared to be reservoir systems. And the whole complex seemed designed to manage water resources for a large population. Think about that for a second. We're talking about people who supposedly didn't have written language, who didn't have metal tools, who were barely surviving in small groups, and yet they were building water management systems that would be impressive even by modern standards. It gets weirder though. Some of the stones they excavated showed signs of precision cutting, like really precise cuts that would be difficult to achieve even with modern tools. The angles were exact, the surfaces were smooth, and there were no tool marks that would indicate how these cuts were made. This is where the scientific community really started to push back, because now we're not just talking about structures that are older than expected, we're talking about technology that shouldn't exist. And in the academic world, when you start making claims about impossible technology, people stop taking you seriously really fast. Dr. Benally knew this, so she was very careful about how she presented her findings. She didn't make wild claims about ancient supercivilizations or lost technologies. She just presented the data and said basically, this is what we found. We don't know how to explain it, but here it is. But even that measured approach wasn't enough. Other archaeologists started publishing rebuttals before they had even examined the evidence firsthand. They argued that the structures must be natural formations that just look man-made. They said the precision cutting could be explained by natural geological processes. They found reasons to dismiss every piece of evidence without actually engaging with the data. And this is the part that really frustrated Dr. Benally and her team. They weren't asking people to believe in aliens or time travelers or anything like that. They were just asking the scientific community to look at the evidence and consider the possibility that our timeline of human development might need some adjustment. But even that was too much. The story might have ended there, with another suppressed discovery gathering dust in academic archives. But then something unexpected happened. Independent researchers with drones and satellite imaging technology started examining the Richat structure on their own, and they started finding even more anomalies. There were geometric patterns in the landscape that were only visible from high altitudes. There were alignments with astronomical features that suggested whoever designed this place had knowledge of celestial mechanics. And there were similar structures scattered across the region that had never been properly investigated because everyone assumed they were just natural formations. One researcher, a guy named Marcus Chen, who ran a YouTube channel about ancient mysteries, actually traveled to Mauritania with his own equipment and started documenting everything he could find. He wasn't a trained archaeologist, which meant the academic community dismissed him immediately. But he had something they didn't: complete freedom to investigate without worrying about academic reputations or funding committees. Marcus spent 3 months in the region, working with local guides and using consumer-grade ground-penetrating radar equipment that you can literally order online. And he found structures that the original research team had missed. He documented them, measured them, and shared all his data openly on the internet. The academic establishment hated this. They called it pseudo-archaeology. They said he was spreading misinformation. But here's the thing. His measurements matched the original team's findings. His documentation was thorough and well organized. And he was careful to distinguish between what he could prove and what was just speculation. More importantly, he made the information accessible to regular people. He explained the implications in simple terms. He showed why this mattered. And he asked the questions that the academic community didn't want to address. If humans were capable of building sophisticated structures thousands of years earlier than we thought, what else might we be wrong about? And why is the scientific establishment so resistant to even considering these possibilities? These questions struck a nerve, because they pointed to a fundamental problem in how we approach history and archaeology. We have this tendency to assume that our current understanding is correct and that anything that challenges it must be wrong. But that's the opposite of how science is supposed to work. Science is supposed to be about following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to uncomfortable conclusions. Dr. Benally eventually published her findings through an independent research foundation in 2020. The paper included all the data, all the measurements, and all the photographs. It was peer-reviewed by scientists from multiple disciplines, and it concluded that the structures beneath the eye of the Sahara warranted serious investigation and could potentially represent evidence of a previously unknown ancient civilization. The response from mainstream archaeology was mostly silence. A few researchers engaged with the data and admitted it was intriguing, but most just ignored it, because acknowledging it would mean opening up questions that the field wasn't ready to deal with. But the story doesn't end there. In 2022, satellite imaging technology improved to the point where researchers could detect subtle variations in the landscape that indicated buried structures. And when they applied this technology to the Sahara region, they found dozens of potential sites that showed similar patterns to the Rishat structure. Some of these sites have now been investigated by independent teams, and they're finding the same kinds of anomalies: precision-cut stones, sophisticated construction techniques, evidence of advanced knowledge that predates known civilizations. And each new discovery makes the evidence harder to dismiss. So what does all this mean? Well, it means we might need to completely rethink our understanding of human history. It means that the neat, simple story of civilization developing in Mesopotamia and Egypt might be missing some really important chapters. It means there might have been advanced cultures that rose and fell thousands of years before recorded history, leaving behind only fragments of evidence that we're just now starting to recognize. And it means that the scientific establishment's reluctance to engage with this evidence is actually holding back our understanding of the past. Because when researchers are afraid to investigate controversial topics, not because the evidence is weak, but because it's too challenging to accepted theories, we stop making progress. Dr. Benali is still fighting to get funding for a comprehensive excavation of the site. She submitted proposals to dozens of institutions and has been rejected by almost all of them. The few that showed interest ultimately backed out, citing concerns about the controversial nature of the research. But she hasn't given up. She's working with independent researchers, citizen scientists, and anyone else willing to engage with the evidence honestly. And slowly the tide is starting to turn. More scientists are willing to at least look at the data. More institutions are acknowledging that there might be something worth investigating. And more people are asking why these discoveries were suppressed in the first place. The truth is, we don't know what's really buried beneath the eye of the Sahara. Maybe it's evidence of a lost civilization that predates everything we know. Maybe it's something even stranger. Or maybe there's a conventional explanation that we just haven't figured out yet. But we'll never know unless we actually investigate properly. And that's what makes this story so frustrating. We have the technology. We have the tools. We have researchers who are willing to do the work. What we don't have is an academic system that's willing to support research that challenges its fundamental assumptions. Scientists didn't try to hide this discovery because it was fake or because the evidence was weak. They tried to hide it because it was too real, too well documented, and too challenging to everything they thought they knew. And that, more than anything else, should tell you how important this discovery really is. The structures are still there, buried beneath the sand. The evidence is still waiting to be fully uncovered, and the questions it raises about human history are still unanswered. But at least now, thanks to researchers like Dr. Benali and independent investigators like Marcus Chen, we know those questions exist. And knowing the questions is the first step toward finding the answers. Maybe one day we'll get the full story of what's beneath the eye of the Sahara. Maybe we'll discover that human civilization is far older and far more sophisticated than we ever imagined. Or maybe we'll find something completely different that opens up even more mysteries. But whatever the truth is, it's worth finding out. Because our history isn't just a collection of facts in textbooks. It's the story of who we are, where we came from, and what we're capable of. And if that story is bigger and stranger and more amazing than we thought, well, doesn't that make it even more worth telling? If you want to see what happens next with this story, make sure you're subscribed. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.